The morning came slow and cold to the wilderness, the way it always did. Marek Volkov stood at the edge of the frozen lake, his breath forming small clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. The ice stretched before him like a sheet of hammered steel, and beyond it, the pines rose black against the lightening sky. This was his world now, simple, brutal, honest. The wilderness didn't lie. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It killed you or it didn't, and that was all there was to it. Behind him, the cabin sat squat and solid against the tree line, smoke rising straight from its chimney in the still air. Inside, his grandson Ilya would be waking soon, probably already pulling on his boots, eager to check the trap lines they'd set yesterday. The boy was 12 now, old enough to learn the real lessons. Not the soft ones they taught in whatever passed for schools these days, but the hard truths that kept a man alive when everything else failed. Marek pulled his coat tighter. The cold was getting to him more these days. 73 years old, and he could feel every single one of them in his bones when the temperature dropped. But he wouldn't complain. Complaint was weakness, and weakness was death. That was the first rule. "Grandfather?" He turned. Ilya stood in the doorway of the cabin, his small frame silhouetted against the warm light from inside. The boy had his mother's eyes. Marek's daughter, Elena, who died bringing him into the world. Sometimes when Marek looked at the boy, he saw her. Sometimes he saw himself. Neither vision brought him comfort. "The traps won't check themselves," Marek said, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't talk much these days. Didn't need to. Ilya nodded and disappeared back inside. 5 minutes later, he emerged fully dressed, rifle slung over his shoulder the way Marek had taught him. The weapon was too big for the boy, but he carried it well. Straight back, barrel pointed down and away. Respect for the tool. That was good. They walked the trapline in silence, their boots crunching through the crust of yesterday's snow. The sun was up now, casting long shadows through the trees. The forest was quiet except for the occasional call of a crow and the whisper of wind through the pines. The first 3 traps were empty. The fourth held a rabbit, frozen solid, its eyes glazed with frost. Ilya reset the trap without being asked, his movements efficient and practiced. Marek watched with approval. The boy learned quick. He didn't waste time with questions or complaints. He just did the work. "Why do we take only what we need?" Ilya asked as they moved to the next trap. It was a question Marek had heard before. He'd asked it himself once, a lifetime ago, to a father who'd also lived by the wilderness rules. "Because the forest gives," Marek said, "but it doesn't give forever. You take too much. You kill the thing that feeds you. Greed is slow suicide." "Is that what happened to the people in the cities?" Marek didn't answer right away. They'd had this conversation before too, in different forms. Ilya was curious about the world beyond the wilderness, about the sprawling settlements to the south where people lived packed together like rabbits in a warren. Marek had seen those places, had lived in them, fought for them, killed for them. They were nothing but noise and confusion and the slow rot of men who'd forgotten what they were. "Cities are where people go to forget," Marek said finally. "Forget what they are. Forget what matters. Out here you can't forget. The cold won't let you. The hunger won't let you. Every day you wake up and you know exactly what you are. A man who needs to survive one more day." "I don't want to forget," Ilya said quietly. "Good. Then you won't." They finished the trap line and headed back to the cabin. The rabbit would make a decent stew, stretched with potatoes and wild onions if Ilya could find any. The boy had a good eye for foraging. He could spot edible plants that most men would walk right past. Another useful skill in a world that didn't care about you. Back at the cabin, Marek set Ilya to skinning the rabbit while he split firewood. The work was methodical, repetitive. Swing, split, stack, swing, split, stack. His shoulders ached, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. It told you that you were still alive, still working. When the pain stopped, that's when you had to worry. He was halfway through the pile when he saw the smoke. It was distant, maybe 3 or 4 kilometers to the east, rising in a thin gray line above the trees. Marek stopped mid-swing, the axe frozen above his head. Smoke meant people, and people this far out meant trouble. He lowered the axe slowly and stared at the smoke for a long moment. Could be hunters, could be trappers, could be refugees from one of the settlements, running from debt or law or whatever demons chased men these days. None of those options were good. "Ilya!" he called. The boy appeared in the doorway, knife in hand. He'd gotten blood on his shirt. Sloppy work, but that could be corrected later. "Come here." Ilya walked over, following Marek's gaze to the smoke. "What is it?" "Trouble, maybe. Maybe nothing. Either way, we watch." "Should we go see?" "No. We watch from here. If they're lost, they'll move on. If they're looking for something, we'll know soon enough." Ilya nodded, understanding. The wilderness had rules, and one of them was simple. Strangers were dangerous until proven otherwise, maybe even after. They spent the rest of the day in careful routine. Marek kept one eye on the distant smoke while they worked. It didn't move. That bothered him. Travelers would be moving, hunters would be moving. Someone camped that still was either injured, stupid, or waiting for something. None of those options were good. As the sun began to set, Marek made his decision. "Inside, now!" Ilya didn't argue. They secured the cabin, shutters closed, door barred, rifle loaded, and ready by the window. Marek had built this place with defense in mind. One door, one window, thick walls of stacked logs. You could hold this cabin against a dozen men if you had the ammunition and the will. He had both. They ate rabbit stew in silence while darkness fell outside. Marek listened to the sounds of the forest, sorting through them with decades of practice. The owl that hunted near the creek, the crack of a branch settling in the cold, the distant howl of a wolf answered by its pack. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. But still, that smoke. "Tell me about the war," Ilya said suddenly. Marek looked up from his bowl. The boy was watching him with those serious eyes, Elena's eyes. "No, you never talk about it, because there's nothing to say. Mother said you were a hero." "Your mother was young," Marek said flatly. "She didn't know what she was talking about." "Were you a soldier?" Marek set down his spoon. "Eat your food." But Ilya didn't eat. He just sat there, waiting, and Marek felt something shift in his chest. The boy deserved answers. Not the whole truth. Nobody deserved that. But something. Some piece of the man his grandfather had been before this cabin, before this wilderness, before the long silence. "I was a soldier," Marek said finally. "A long time ago. I did what soldiers do. I fought. I killed. And when the war ended, I came here." "Why?" "Because I was done with killing." "But you still hunt." "Hunting for food isn't the same as killing men, boy. Don't confuse the two." Ilya considered this. "Did you kill a lot of men?" "Yes." "How many?" Marek stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Enough. Now finish eating and get ready for bed. Tomorrow we're moving the trapline north. The game is getting scarce on the east side." He walked to the window and peered out through a gap in the shutters. The night was full dark now, the stars bright and cold overhead. Somewhere out there, that smoke was still rising. He could smell it faintly on the wind, mixing with the pine and snow. Someone was coming. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he used to feel artillery before it landed. Some instinct sharpened by years of war and survival. They were looking for him. The thought should have surprised him, but it didn't. He'd known, somewhere deep down, that the past would find him eventually. It always did. You could run to the ends of the earth and it would still follow, patient and relentless as winter. But why now? After all these years? Behind him, Ilya cleaned up the dishes without being asked. Good boy. He'd make a strong man someday if the world didn't break him first. If Marek could teach him enough to survive what was coming, because something was coming. Marek was sure of it now. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window with his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness, listening to the forest. Around midnight, the wind picked up, sending snow devils dancing across the frozen lake. The temperature dropped. Marek could hear the ice groaning and shifting, expanding in the cold. 3 hours before dawn, he heard it. Footsteps. Not loud. Not close. But there, unmistakable, crunching through the snow, coming from the east, from where the smoke had been. Marek's hand tightened on the rifle. He waited, breathing slow and steady, watching the tree line. The footsteps came closer. Stopped. Started again. Whoever it was, they were being careful. That meant they were either afraid or dangerous. Again, neither option was good. The footsteps circled the cabin, staying just inside the tree line. Testing, watching. Marek tracked the sound, his rifle following. He could take the shot if he needed to. The walls wouldn't stop a bullet, and neither would the darkness. He'd made harder shots than this. Much harder. But he didn't shoot. Because something held him back. Some instinct even deeper than the one that warned of danger. A feeling he hadn't felt in 50 years. Recognition. The footsteps stopped directly north of the cabin. Silence. Then, a voice, rough and accented, speaking in Russian. "Marek Volkov, I know you're in there. I've come a long way to find you." Marek didn't move, didn't breathe. That voice. He knew that voice, or he'd known one like it, a lifetime ago, in a place he'd tried to forget. "I'm not here to hurt you," the voice continued. "I just want to talk about what happened, about what you did, what he did." The words hit Marek like a punch, because he knew, suddenly and completely, what this was about. There was only one thing he'd done that would bring someone this far, through this much cold and darkness. Only one choice that had mattered enough to echo across 50 years. Ilya stirred in his bed behind Marek. "Grandfather? Who is that?" "Stay down," Marek said quietly. "Don't move." He stood slowly, rifle ready, and moved to the door. His hands were steady. That was muscle memory. But his heart was pounding, and that was something else entirely. He lifted the bar from the door, paused, then pulled it open. The man standing in the snow was old, not as old as Marek, but close. He wore a heavy coat and a wool hat pulled low, and his breath steamed in the freezing air. In the starlight, Mark could see his face, weathered, scarred, but familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. But it wasn't the face he expected. This man was too young, too whole. "You're not him," Mark said. "No," the man agreed. "I'm his son, Anton Petrov. My father sent me to find you." Petrov. The name hit Mark like falling ice. He took a step back, the rifle coming up automatically. "Easy," Anton said, raising his hands. "I told you. I'm not here to hurt you. My father just wants to talk. After all these years, he wants to say thank you." "Thank you," Marek repeated. The words felt foreign in his mouth. "For sparing his life. In the war. He said you had him in your sights, and you let him live. Is that true?" Marek stood very still. The cold wind cut across the clearing, driving snow against his face. Behind him, he could hear Ilya getting out of bed, could feel the boy's presence at his shoulder. "Grandfather?" Ilya whispered. But Marek couldn't speak, couldn't move, because the memories were flooding back now, fast and brutal and unstoppable. The winter of 1975, the siege, the endless cold and the endless dying, and that one moment, that one impossible choice. "It's true, isn't it?" Anton pressed. "You were the ghost, the sniper. You killed 200 men during the siege, but you let my father live. Why?" The ghost. Marek hadn't heard that name in half a century. It belonged to someone else, a different man, a killer who'd crouched in frozen ruins and ended lives with mechanical precision. That man was dead. Had to be dead. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marek said. His voice sounded hollow even to himself. "Yes, you do. My father described you, described the place, the moment. He's never forgotten. And when he got sick last year, when the doctors told him he didn't have much time left, he made me promise. Find the ghost. Find the man who gave me a second chance. Tell him thank you." "Your father is dying?" "Lung cancer. The doctors give him maybe 6 months. He's in a hospital in Moscow right now, too weak to travel. But he made me swear I'd find you. He's been looking for you for decades, following rumors, checking records, tracking down anyone who might know where you went after the war. It took me 3 years, but I finally found the trail. An old army buddy who remembered you talking about this place, about coming here to disappear." Marek's grip on the rifle loosened. The memories were coming faster now. The ruins, the snow, the boy in the uniform, the face in his scope. The moment he'd pulled his finger off the trigger and let the target walk away. He was just a kid, Marek heard himself say. Couldn't have been more than 17, green uniform, no weapon. 16, Anton said quietly. He was 16 years old, and you're right, he'd lost his rifle running from your position. He thought he was dead, but then he heard you shout. Told him to run. Told him in his own language to get out and not look back. He ran. He lived. He went home when the war ended. He built a life. He had a family. All because you chose mercy when you could have chosen the easy shot. The easy shot? Marek almost laughed. There was nothing easy about that shot. Nothing easy about any of it. Tell your father I don't want his thanks, Marek said. Tell him to forget he ever saw me. I can't do that. Then you've wasted your time. He's dying, Mr. Volkov. He just wants to meet you, just once, to shake your hand and say thank you before he goes. Is that really too much to ask? Yes. The word came out harder than Marek intended. Anton flinched, but held his ground. Why? What are you so afraid of? I'm not afraid of anything. Then prove it. Come with me. Come back to Moscow. Just for a few days. Meet my father. Let him have this one thing before he dies. No. Why not? Because that man you're looking for doesn't exist anymore. Marek's voice cracked like breaking ice. The ghost is dead. He died the day the war ended. All that's left is this. An old man in a cabin teaching his grandson how to survive. That's all. There's nothing else. Anton stood silent for a long moment, studying Marek's face. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. He held it up so Marek could see. It showed a young man in a hospital bed, thin and pale, with tubes running to his arms. But he was smiling, and in his hands he held a picture of his own, a faded, creased photograph of a snowy battlefield. This is my father, Anton said. This is the man you saved. He's not asking you to be the ghost. He's just asking you to be human, to acknowledge what you did, to let him say thank you while he still can. Marek stared at the photograph, at the dying man, at the smile that shouldn't exist, at the life that should have ended in the snow 50 years ago. Please, Anton said softly. It would mean everything to him, and maybe it would mean something to you too. Grandfather? Ilya's voice was small behind him. What's he talking about? What war? What ghost? Marek closed his eyes. The cold pressed against him, the past pressed against him. Everything pressed against him, and suddenly he was tired. So tired. Go back to bed, Ilya, he said quietly. But now. The boy retreated. Marek heard the bunk creak as he climbed back in. Then silence. Just the wind and the cold and the weight of 50 years. I'll give you tonight to think about it, Anton said. I'm camped about an hour east of here. Come find me in the morning if you change your mind. If not, he shrugged. I'll tell my father I tried. He turned to go, then paused. My father said to tell you something. He said you shouted at him that day. 3 words in his language. Do you remember what you said? Marek remembered. Of course he remembered. Those 3 words had haunted him for 50 years. Go home, boy, he whispered. That's right, Anton said. Go home, boy. And he did. Because of you, he went home. Think about that. Then he walked away, disappearing into the darkness between the trees. His footsteps faded. The forest went quiet again. Marek stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at nothing. The cold bit at his face and hands, but he didn't feel it. He was somewhere else, somewhere very far away. Winter, 1975. The siege of Corvasque. The ghost in the tower, and the choice that changed everything. When Marek finally closed the door and turned back to the cabin, Ilya was sitting up in bed, watching him with wide eyes. Tell me, the boy said. Please, I need to understand. Marek looked at his grandson, at Elena's eyes staring out from that young face, at the future looking at the past, asking for truth. He sat down heavily in his chair by the fire. The rifle rested across his knees. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled, and between them, 50 years of silence waited to be broken. I was 23, Marek began. His voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. The war had been going on for 2 years. It was supposed to be over in months, but wars never end when they're supposed to. They just keep going, swallowing men and spitting out corpses, until there's nothing left to swallow. Ilya didn't move, didn't interrupt. He just listened. I was good at killing, Marek continued. That's the truth. Some men aren't. They hesitate. They feel too much. But I learned to turn that off. I learned to see targets instead of people, numbers instead of faces. That's what made me valuable. That's what made me the ghost. Why did they call you that? Because I wasn't there. That's what it felt like to the enemy. They'd be walking through ruins or crossing a street, and then one of them would just drop. No sound, no warning, just dead. And they never saw where the bullet came from. They searched and searched, but I was always gone. Like a ghost. How many did you kill? The question hung in the air between them. Marek stared at the fire. 206, he said finally. I kept count. They made us keep count. Every kill had to be confirmed, documented. 206 men, some were soldiers, some weren't. Some were young, some were old. 206 lives ended because I pulled a trigger. That's a lot. Yes. Were you proud? Marek looked at his grandson, really looked at him. I thought I was. At the time, I thought I was serving my country, protecting my comrades, doing what needed to be done. But pride is a luxury. You can only afford it when you don't think too hard about what you're being proud of. What changed? Number 207, Marek said quietly. The one that should have been. The one that wasn't. He stood and walked to the window, peering out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, Anton was settling into his camp for the night, waiting for an answer, waiting for Marek to decide if the past was finally ready to be faced. It was January, Marek said. The coldest January in 50 years. We were holding a city called Corvasque. The enemy had us surrounded, trying to starve us out. Both sides were dying from the cold as much as the fighting. Frostbite, hypothermia. Men would fall asleep on watch and never wake up. Freeze solid where they sat. Did you freeze? Almost, but I had a good position. An old clock tower in the center of the city, 6 stories up, with a clear view of the main approaches. I'd been there for 3 weeks, living in that tower, sleeping there, eating there, and killing there. The enemy knew I was somewhere in the city, but they couldn't find me. I was too careful, too patient. Marek paused, the memories coming in flashes now. The frozen ladder climbing up through the tower, the cramped space at the top, barely big enough to lie down. The scope, so cold it would freeze to his skin if he wasn't careful. The breath, white and visible, that had to be controlled, managed, hidden. On the 14th day of January, I was watching the eastern approach. There was a collapsed building there, maybe 800 meters from my position. The enemy had been using it for cover, moving supplies through at night. I'd already taken 11 targets in that zone. Command was happy. They wanted more. And you saw someone? I saw a boy, Marek said. He came out of the ruins around noon. Broad daylight, stupid, suicidal. He was carrying a pack that looked too heavy for him, and he was moving too fast. Scared. He'd probably gotten separated from his unit. Maybe they'd sent him out alone. Maybe he'd run. I don't know, but there he was, right in my kill zone. Did you shoot him? I should have. It would have been easy. A clear shot. No wind. Perfect visibility. He would have been dead before he heard the sound. Number 207. Another confirmation, another commendation, another step toward whatever we were fighting for. But you didn't. No, Marek said. I didn't. He turned back to face Ilya. The boy was sitting on the edge of his bunk now, completely focused. I had him centered in my scope. I had my breathing controlled. My finger was on the trigger. Everything was perfect. And then he stopped. Right there in the middle of the street, just stopped walking and stood there. And I realized he dropped something. What? A photograph. It must have fallen out of his pack. He bent down to pick it up, and when he did, I saw his face clearly, and he was just young, so young, 16, maybe. Maybe younger. And he was crying. Marek's voice went quiet. He was standing there in the middle of a war zone holding this photograph, and he was crying. And I realized he knew. He knew someone was watching him, knew he was probably already dead, but he'd stopped anyway because this photograph mattered more than his life. What did you do? I watched him. Through my scope, I watched him look at that photograph, and I tried to see what was in it. I couldn't make out details, but I could see figures. Maybe family, maybe friends, people who loved him, people who would miss him when he didn't come home. So you let him go? I should have, Marek said. But I was weak, or maybe I was finally seeing clearly for the first time in 2 years. I don't know. But I couldn't pull the trigger. I just couldn't. And he stood there for maybe 30 seconds, which is forever in a sniper's world. Long enough for me to make the shot 10 times over. But I didn't. I just watched him. Then what happened? He ran. Finally put the photograph away and ran for the cover of the next building. And I let him. I tracked him the whole way with my scope, but I never fired. And when he disappeared into the shadows, I thought that was it. Thought I'd never see him again. But you did? 2 days later, he came back through the same route. This time with his unit, 5 men. They were moving supplies, probably the same thing he'd been trying to do alone before. And I watched them cross my kill zone. I had clear shots on all of them. Could have taken out the whole squad. But I remembered his face, remembered him crying over that photograph, and I couldn't do it. Marek sat back down, suddenly exhausted. So I gave them a warning instead. I fired 1 shot into the ground in front of them, just to let them know they were being watched. They scattered, ran for cover, and one of them, the boy, he looked back, looked right at my position. For just a second, we made eye contact across 800 meters, and I swear he knew who I was, knew what I'd done, or hadn't done. What happened then? I shouted at him. In his own language. I'd picked up enough to know the basics. I shouted, "Go home, boy." And he did. He ran, and I never saw him again. Not until tonight, when his son showed up at my door. The cabin went silent, except for the crackling fire. Ilya processed this, his young face serious. "Did anyone find out?" he asked finally. "That you let them go?" "No, I filed a report saying there were no viable targets that day. My commander believed me. Why wouldn't he? I was the ghost. I didn't miss. If I said there were no targets, there were no targets." "But you did miss. You missed on purpose." "Yes." "Why? After killing 200 others, why spare that one?" Marek looked at his hands, old hands now, scarred and weathered, but steady. Always steady. Except for that one moment 50 years ago when they'd refused to kill. "Because I saw something in him that I'd stopped seeing in myself," Marek said quietly. "Humanity, fear, love for something beyond the war. I'd become a machine, a very efficient machine, but he reminded me that we were all just scared boys, following orders, dying for causes we didn't fully understand. And if I killed him, I'd be killing that last piece of humanity, in him, and in me." "So you chose mercy." "I chose weakness," Marek corrected. "At least that's what I thought at the time. I thought I'd failed, lost my edge, become soft. It terrified me." "Did you kill anyone after that?" "No, that was my last mission. 2 weeks later, the siege was broken. We were evacuated. The war continued for another 6 months, but I wasn't part of it. I requested a transfer, got sent to a supply depot in the rear, spent the rest of my service counting bullets instead of firing them. And when the war ended, I came here, to this wilderness, as far from people as I could get. I built this cabin. I learned to hunt, to trap, to survive. I tried to forget." "Did you?" Marek smiled sadly. "No, you never forget. The faces blur, the names disappear, but the numbers stay sharp. 206, and one that got away." Ilya was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind had died down. The night was settling into that deep, frozen stillness that came before dawn. "What are you going to do?" the boy asked finally. "About the man outside?" His father? Marek didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and shift. 206 men dead, one man alive. And now that one man was dying, wanted to say thank you for a choice Marek had spent 50 years trying to forget. I don't know, he said honestly. I don't know. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Because deep down in that part of him that had pulled his finger off the trigger all those years ago, he knew exactly what he was going to do. He just didn't know if he had the courage to do it. Dawn came reluctant and gray, bleeding pale light across the frozen lake. Marek hadn't slept. He'd sat by the window all night, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness slowly surrender to morning. His mind had traveled back through 50 years, replaying moments he'd buried deep, faces he'd tried to forget. But memory was patient. It waited in the shadows, and when you finally stopped running, it caught up. Ilya was already awake, moving quietly around the cabin. The boy had learned to read Marek's silences, knew when to talk and when to simply exist in the space between words. He made tea from pine needles and melted snow, set a cup beside Marek without comment, then began preparing breakfast. "You're going to see him," Ilya said. It wasn't a question. Marek took a sip of the bitter tea. "Yes." "Why? You said the past was dead." "I lied." Marek set down the cup. "The past is never dead. It just waits, and I'm tired of waiting with it." "Can I come?" "No." "Why not?" "Because this is my burden, not yours." Ilya turned from the stove, his young face set with determination. "You always say I need to learn, that the wilderness teaches hard lessons. Isn't this a lesson too?" Marek studied his grandson. The boy was right in his way. Life didn't separate its lessons into neat categories. Survival skills over here, moral reckonings over there. Everything bled together. Everything mattered. "All right," Marek said finally, "but you stay close. You listen. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" "I understand." They ate quickly, dressed warmly, and set out as the sun cleared the tree line. Marek carried his rifle in a small pack with water and dried meat. Ilya followed with his own rifle. Smaller, but just as deadly in capable hands. The forest was quiet except for their footsteps crunching through the snow. Anton's camp was exactly where he'd said it would be, about an hour east through dense pine. Marek could smell the wood smoke before he saw it, could read the efficiency of the camp from 100 meters out. A proper fire, low and controlled. A shelter built against the wind. Snow cleared in a wide perimeter. This was a man who knew how to survive in hostile territory. That meant military training. That meant danger, if it came to that. But Marek didn't think it would. Some instinct told him Anton was exactly what he claimed to be, a son on a mission, carrying his father's dying wish through the cold. They entered the camp slowly, making noise so Anton would hear them coming. The man emerged from his shelter, a small tent pitched between two trees, and stood waiting. In the morning light, Marek could see him more clearly. Late 40s, maybe 50. Strong build, weathered face, eyes that had seen things, soldier's eyes. "Mr. Volkov," Anton said, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I." Marek stopped 10 meters away, rifle held loosely but ready. "This is my grandson, Ilya." Anton nodded to the boy. "You look like your grandfather." "I hope so," Ilya said quietly. A ghost of a smile crossed Anton's face. "You should be proud. He's a good man." "He's a killer," Ilya corrected. "That's what he told me. 206 men." The smile faded. Anton looked at Marek. "You told him. He deserved the truth." "And what truth is that? That you were a monster? That you're trying to hide from what you did? Something like that?" "You're wrong," Anton said flatly. "My father doesn't think you're a monster. He thinks you're the bravest man he ever met." Marek almost laughed. Brave. That wasn't the word he'd use. Broken, maybe, haunted, but not brave. "Tell me about him," Marek said instead. "Your father, what kind of man did he become?" Anton gestured to his fire. "Sit. I'll make coffee. Real coffee, not pine needle water." They sat on logs arranged around the fire while Anton worked. He produced a battered pot and actual coffee grounds from his pack, a luxury this far into the wilderness. The smell alone was intoxicating, rich and dark and full of memory. My father's name is Dmitry Petrov, Anton began, measuring grounds into the pot. He was born in a village 300 kilometers south of Corvasque, farmer's family. Poor, but proud. When the war started, he was 15, too young to fight, but they took him anyway, conscripted him with a dozen other boys from his village, gave them uniforms and rifles and sent them north. To die, Marek said. Yes, that's what they thought, but he survived, barely. The siege of Corvasque was his first real combat. He'd been in theater for maybe 3 weeks when his unit got caught in a bombardment, lost half their number in the first hour. The survivors scattered, got separated. My father ended up alone in the ruins with no weapon, no supplies, and no idea how to get back to his lines. He was lost. Completely. For 2 days he hid in the rubble, freezing, starving, waiting to die or be captured. Then his sergeant found him, gave him a pack and told him to run supplies through the East Zone, said it was the only route still open. My father knew it was suicide, but he went anyway, because that's what soldiers do. They follow orders, even when the orders are death sentences. The coffee began to boil. Anton poured 3 cups, handed them around. Marek wrapped his cold hands around the tin cup and breathed in the steam. He made it halfway, Anton continued, dropped the pack twice from exhaustion, nearly collapsed from hypothermia. But he kept going because stopping meant freezing. And then, right in the middle of the widest street, the photograph fell out of his pocket. Who was in it? Ilya asked. His mother and his little sister. The only picture he owned. He'd carried it through basic training, through transport, through everything. It was the only piece of home he had left. So when it fell, he stopped to pick it up. Even though he knew someone was watching him. How did he know? Ilya pressed. Anton looked at Marek. Tell him. Marek took a long drink of coffee, feeling the heat spread through his chest. Because anyone standing in the open like that was already dead. The only question was when. Every sniper in the city had overlapping fields of fire. The enemy knew it. We knew it. You didn't cross open ground unless you wanted to die. So when your father stopped, he trailed off, remembering that moment with perfect clarity. The boy in the scope, the photograph clutched in trembling hands, the decision hanging like frost in the air. He thought he was saying goodbye, Anton finished, to his mother, to his sister, to the life he was never going to live. He told me he made peace with it in those 30 seconds, accepted that he was about to die. And then nothing happened. I couldn't do it, Marek said simply. Why not? Because he was already dead. In every way that mattered, he was already dead. The war had killed him the moment they put that uniform on him. Pulling the trigger would have just made it official, and I was tired of making things official. Anton nodded slowly. He ran. When he realized he wasn't dead, he ran for cover, made it to the next building, collapsed there and stayed hidden until dark, then worked his way back to his unit. They'd written him off, thought he'd deserted or been killed. When he stumbled into camp that night, they almost shot him as a ghost. And 2 days later I saw him again, Marek said, with his squad. Yes, he told me about that. Said you fired a warning shot. Could have killed them all, but you gave them a chance instead. They scattered. And when he looked back, he saw you. Just for a second, just long enough to understand. Understand what? That you were the one who'd spared him, that you'd made a choice, and that you were giving him a gift, a chance to go home. So he took it. When the siege broke 2 weeks later, he was evacuated with the wounded. Minor frostbite, nothing serious. And when the war finally ended, he went home. Back to his village, back to his mother and sister. Marek stared into his coffee. The story should have ended there. Boy goes home, lives his life, forgets the war. But life was never that simple. He couldn't forget you, Anton said, as if reading Marek's thoughts. He tried, wanted to move on, build a normal life. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw that moment, standing in the street with his mother's photograph, waiting for the bullet that never came. It haunted him. Survivor's guilt, Marek said. Maybe, or maybe gratitude. He didn't know which, so he started searching for you. Asked around, checked military records, tracked down other soldiers who'd served at Corvasque. Most of them were dead or didn't want to talk about it. But slowly, piece by piece, he assembled the story. The ghost. The sniper who'd killed over 200 men. The legend who'd disappeared after the war. I wasn't a legend, Mark said sharply. I was just good at my job. You were feared, Anton corrected. The enemy called you death itself, said you could kill from impossible distances, that you never missed, that you had no mercy. They were right. I didn't, not until my father. Marek nodded. The fire crackled between them. Somewhere in the forest, a crow called out, harsh and lonely. He got married, Anton continued, had children, built a good life, became a teacher, if you can believe that, taught history to high school students, and every year on the 14th of January, he would tell them about Corvasque, about the siege, about the boy who should have died but didn't. Did he tell them about me? No. He protected you. Even though he didn't know your name or where you'd gone, he protected your identity because he understood what would happen if people knew. They'd want answers, explanations. Some would call you a traitor for sparing an enemy. Others would call you a hero for showing mercy. But he knew the truth was more complicated than that, so he kept your secret. Ilya had been listening intently, his coffee untouched and cooling in his hands. How did you find him then? Grandfather, I mean. If your father never told anyone? Cancer changes things, Anton said quietly. When the doctors told him he had 6 months, maybe a year, everything shifted. Suddenly all those years of searching, of protecting, of wondering, they crystallized into one simple need. He wanted to meet you, wanted to look you in the eye and say thank you, just once before he died. So he told you everything. Everything. The moment, the street, the photograph, the warning shot, all of it. And he made me promise I'd find you. I took 3 years off work, spent my savings, followed every lead, no matter how thin. And finally, 6 months ago, I found a man who'd served with you. He was dying too. Liver failure. But before he went, he told me you'd talked about this place, about disappearing into the wilderness, about building a cabin where nobody would ever find you. Gregor, Marek said softly. His name was Gregor. Yes, you remember him? He was my spotter, watched my back during the siege, good man. I didn't know he'd died. Last October, but he gave me what I needed, direction, region, enough to start searching. I've been in these woods for 2 months, checking every cabin, every trapper, every hunter. And last week I met a trader who mentioned an old man living with his grandson, a man who kept to himself, who never talked about the past. And you knew. I hoped, and then I saw you last night, and I was sure. My father described you, said you had steady hands and sad eyes, said you moved like a predator but spoke like a poet. He never forgot you. Marek set down his coffee cup. His hands were shaking slightly, not from cold, from something else, something he didn't have a name for. Your father is wrong about me, he said. I'm not brave. I'm not a hero. I made one decision 50 years ago, and I've been running from it ever since. Living out here, hiding from the world, teaching my grandson to survive because survival is all I understand. That's not heroism. That's cowardice. No, Anton said firmly. That's processing. That's carrying the weight. Do you know what most soldiers did after the war? They went home and pretended it never happened, buried the trauma, drank it away, beat it into their families. But you? You came here and faced it, every single day. You didn't run from the weight, you carried it. That takes courage. I killed 206 men, and you saved one. Why is that the choice you can't forgive yourself for? The question hung in the cold air. Marek didn't have an answer. Or maybe he had too many answers, all of them contradictory, all of them true. Because it broke something in me, he said finally. The moment I let your father live, everything I'd built, all that discipline, all that detachment, it shattered. I couldn't kill anymore. Couldn't pull the trigger, the machine I'd turned myself into. It just stopped working, and I didn't know how to be anything else. So you became this, a man who lives by different rules, who takes only what he needs, who teaches his grandson to respect life. I teach him to survive. Same thing. Survival means understanding the value of life. Yours, his, everything in this forest. You didn't stop being a hunter, Mr. Volkov. You just learned to hunt with conscience. That's evolution, not weakness. Ilya spoke up suddenly. Is your father really dying? Anton turned to the boy. Yes. The cancer is in his lungs, spreading. The doctors tried chemotherapy, radiation, everything. Nothing worked. Now they're just managing his pain while he waits. How long does he have? Weeks, maybe a month if he's lucky. He's in Moscow, in a hospital room. Too weak to travel, but conscious, clear, waiting to hear from me. What happens if grandfather doesn't go? Ilya asked. What happens to your father? He dies disappointed, grateful for the life he got to live, but disappointed that he never got to close the circle, to say thank you to the man who gave him everything. Marek stood abruptly. The movement startled a bird from a nearby tree. It took off with a clatter of wings, disappearing into the gray sky. I need to think, he said. This isn't a decision I can make standing here. Of course. I understand. How long do you need? I don't know. A day. Maybe more. Anton nodded. I'll wait. I've come this far. I can wait a little longer. Marek turned to go, then paused. The photograph. Your father. Does he still have it? The one he was holding that day? Yes. He keeps it in his wallet, shows it to the nurses sometimes, tells them it's the picture that saved his life. And his mother? His sister? His mother died 10 years ago, peaceful, in her sleep. His sister is still alive, lives in the same village where they grew up. She's the one who's with him now, at the hospital, holding his hand while he waits. Marek absorbed this. A family, a life. All the years that happened because of one moment of hesitation. Come on, Ilya, he said. They walked back through the forest in silence. The sun was higher now, filtering through the pines in long shafts of pale light. Snow began to fall, light and dry, adding fresh powder to the frozen landscape. Marek's mind churned with memories and mathematics. 206 dead. 1 alive. Which number mattered more? Back at the cabin, Ilya went straight to work on their daily routine, checking traps, gathering firewood, preparing food. But Marek could see the boy's mind was elsewhere, could see the questions forming. They ate lunch in silence. Rabbit stew again, stretched with potatoes and wild onions Ilya had found yesterday. The boy had a good eye. He'd make a fine hunter, a fine man. If Marek could just teach him enough before what? Before he died? Before the past finally caught up completely? Tell me about the siege, Ilya said suddenly. The whole story. Not just the boy you spared. Everything. Marek set down his spoon. Why? Because I need to understand who you were, not just who you are. If you're going to Moscow to face your past, I need to know what that past looks like. It's not pretty. I didn't ask if it was pretty. I asked to hear it. Marek studied his grandson. 12 years old, still a child in so many ways, but the wilderness aged you fast. Ilya had already seen death, animals, weather, the harsh mathematics of survival. Maybe he was ready for this too. All right, Marek said, but once I start, I'm telling all of it. The truth. No filters. Can you handle that? Yes. Then listen. Marek stood and walked to the window. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, erasing their tracks from this morning, covering the world in white silence. The siege began in December, he said. Winter was already brutal. The enemy had surrounded Corvasque on 3 sides, cutting off supply lines. Inside the city were maybe 5,000 defenders and 20,000 civilians. Outside were 3 times that number, waiting to starve us out or freeze us to death. Both sides were dug in, both sides were dying, and both sides knew the spring thaw would decide everything. What was your job? I was assigned to the sniper division. There were 12 of us. Our job was simple: kill anyone who threatened the defense. Officers, machine gunners, radio operators, anyone who made themselves a target. We worked in pairs, sniper and spotter. I was paired with Gregor. He found the targets. I eliminated them. How many did you kill in the first week? 17. Mostly officers. The enemy was careless at first. They thought the cold was their ally. They stood too long in the open, made themselves easy targets. But they learned. After a week, they stopped being careless. So what did you do? We got better, learned their routines, their shift changes, where they felt safe, and we proved they were never safe. A man could be drinking coffee in what he thought was cover, and then he'd just stop, fall over, dead. His comrades wouldn't even know which direction the shot came from. Marek's voice had gone flat, distant, the way it always did when he talked about the war, like he was describing something that happened to someone else. By January, I'd killed 93 men. Gregor kept the tallies. Every kill had to be confirmed. We'd watch through the scope to make sure they didn't get up, make sure the medics couldn't save them. It was methodical, professional, and I was good at it. Did you feel anything? At first, yes. Guilt, disgust, fear. But you can't function like that. Not for long. So I learned to compartmentalize, learned to see uniforms instead of faces, numbers instead of names. It was survival in its way. If I felt too much, I'd hesitate, and hesitation got you killed. But you didn't hesitate for 206 kills. No, I didn't. I became exactly what they needed me to be. A machine. Efficient, reliable, cold. Until the boy. Until Dmitri, Marek corrected. His name is Dmitri. And yes, until him. He turned from the window to face Ilya. The 14th of January was the coldest day of the siege, minus 40 degrees. Men were freezing to death at their posts. The enemy had stopped attacking. Both sides were just trying to survive the cold. I was in my tower watching the eastern approach. When I saw him, what made him different? Everything. Nothing. I don't know. He was young. They were all young. He was scared. They were all scared. But when he stopped to pick up that photograph, something shifted. I saw him, really saw him, not as a target, as a person, a boy who missed his mother, who wanted to go home, who had no business being in that frozen hell. And you couldn't kill him. I couldn't. My finger was on the trigger. My breathing was controlled. Every technical element was perfect. But I couldn't pull it. Because I knew, if I killed him, I'd be killing the last piece of humanity I had left. The last proof that I was still a man and not just a weapon. So you let him go. I let him go. And in that moment, everything changed. The machine broke, the ghost died, and I was just me again. Marek, 23 years old, frozen, terrified, covered in blood I couldn't wash off. What did you do? I stayed in that tower for 2 more weeks, but I never fired another shot. Gregor knew something was wrong, kept asking if I was all right. I told him I was just being cautious, waiting for perfect shots. But the truth was, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't pull the trigger. The enemy would walk through my kill zone and I'd just watch. Let them go, every single one. Gregor didn't report you? No, he covered for me, filed false reports, said the targets were too far, too fast, too obscured. He saved my life. And when the siege broke, when we were finally evacuated, he pulled me aside and said, "Whatever happened to you in there, it's not weakness. It's just human. Don't forget that." Marek sat back down, suddenly exhausted. But I did forget, or I tried to. I came here and buried it all, the kills, the mercy, the guilt, all of it. Thought if I got far enough away, it would just fade. Did it? No. It followed me, every day, every night. In my dreams, I see them. All 206, standing in a line, waiting for me to explain why they had to die while Dmitri got to live. And I have no answer. No reason good enough. It was just random, arbitrary. One boy stopped to look at a photograph, and I broke. Ilya was quiet for a long time, processing this. Outside, the snow continued to fall, building drifts against the cabin walls. "I think you should go to Moscow," the boy said finally. Marek looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because you need to see what your choice created. You've spent 50 years thinking about the men you killed, but you've never seen the man you saved, the life he built, the family he raised, the students he taught, all because you chose mercy when it was hardest. That's not something to run from, grandfather. That's something to witness. And if it doesn't help, if I still can't make peace with it, then at least you tried. At least you faced it. Isn't that what you teach me? That facing hard things is how you survive them? Marek smiled despite himself. The boy was using his own lessons against him. When did you get so wise? I have a good teacher. A broken teacher. No, Ilya said firmly. A human teacher. One who made a choice and had the courage to live with it. That's not broken. That's strong. Marek stood and walked to the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. You're more like your mother than you know. Is that good? Yes, it's very good. They spent the rest of the day preparing. If Marek was going to Moscow, he'd need supplies, documents, money, things he hadn't thought about in years. The wilderness had simplified his life to its core elements: food, warmth, survival. Everything else was excess. But the world beyond these trees ran on different rules: paper and currency and bureaucracy. That evening, they walked back to Anton's camp. The man was sitting by his fire, staring into the flames. He looked up as they approached, hope flickering in his eyes. I'll go, Marek said without preamble. But on conditions. Name them. First, Ilya comes with us. I'm not leaving him alone out here. Agreed. Second, we go fast. I don't have patience for long journeys. We get there, I meet your father, and we leave. Of course. Third, after this we're done. Your father gets his closure, I get mine, and then we never speak of this again. Understood? Anton stood, extending his hand. Understood. Marek hesitated, then took the offered hand. The grip was firm, warm, a soldier's handshake, men who understood weight and cost. We leave in the morning, Anton said. I have a truck parked 2 days south of here. From there we can reach the train line. 3 days to Moscow if the weather holds. It won't, Marek said, looking at the sky. Storm coming, big one. We'll need to move fast. That night, Marek couldn't sleep again. He lay in his bunk, listening to Ilya's quiet breathing, and thought about the journey ahead. Moscow. A city he'd left 50 years ago, swearing never to return. A dying man waiting in a hospital bed. A debt being repaid, though Marek had never asked for payment. He thought about Dmitri, 16 years old, crying over a photograph. And now, what? 66? Dying of cancer. A full life lived in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The heartbeat where Marek's finger had refused to squeeze. 206 men never got that space. Never got to go home, raise families, grow old. They got bullets and unmarked graves and the slow erasure of time. Was one life worth 206? The math didn't balance. It never would. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was simpler. In a world of killing, he'd chosen not to kill. Just what to once. Just for one boy with a photograph. And somehow, that single choice had echoed across 50 years and thousands of kilometers to find him here, in this frozen wilderness, pulling him back toward the past he'd tried to escape. Marek closed his eyes and made his peace with it. He would go. He would face Dmitri. And maybe, just maybe, he'd finally understand why his finger had refused to move that day. Why mercy had proven stronger than discipline. Why one life had mattered more than all the mathematics of war. The storm hit just before dawn, exactly as Marek had predicted. Snow came sideways through the trees, driven by winds that howled like wounded animals. They broke camp anyway, moving through the whiteout with the kind of grim determination that came from understanding there was no good choice, only the least bad one. Stay and wait out the storm, losing precious days while a dying man waited in Moscow. Or push through and risk everything. Marek chose risk. He always had. Anton led the way, compass in hand, navigating by instinct and experience through conditions that would have killed most men. Ilya stayed close to Marek, one hand gripping his grandfather's coat, the other carrying his rifle wrapped in canvas to protect it from the snow. They moved in single file, each step deliberate, testing the ground before committing weight. How much farther? Ilya shouted over the wind. 6 hours in good weather, Anton called back. 12 in this. Maybe more. They didn't have 12 hours. The temperature was dropping fast, and even with their heavy coats and layers, hypothermia was a real threat. Marek could feel it creeping into his fingers and toes, that dangerous numbness that whispered lies about warmth and rest. He'd seen men die from listening to those whispers, had closed their frozen eyes himself during the siege. "We need to keep moving," Marek said. "No stops except to check direction. Understand?" Ilya nodded, his face already red from the cold and wind. The boy was tough, but he was still just 12. This kind of journey aged you in hours, not years. They pushed on through the white hell. Time became meaningless, measured only in steps and breaths and the gradual progression from tree to tree. Marek's mind drifted as his body moved on autopilot, muscle memory taking over while his thoughts wandered back to other storms, other marches through frozen waste. The winter of 75, the retreat from the northern sectors. 50 men had started that march. 19 finished it. The rest were left behind, frozen monuments to bad planning and worse luck. Marek had survived by turning off everything except the will to take one more step, and then another, and another, until stepping became automatic and thinking became impossible. "Grandfather," Ilya's voice cut through the memory. "I can't feel my hands." Marek stopped, turned. The boy was struggling, his movements getting sluggish, dangerous. He pulled Ilya close, took the boy's hands between his own and rubbed them hard, forcing circulation. "Listen to me," Marek said, his face inches from Ilya's. "Pain is good. Pain means you're alive. It's when you stop feeling pain that you need to worry. Understand?" "It hurts," Ilya said, and there were tears freezing on his cheeks. "Good. Let it hurt. Use it. Let it make you angry. Angry keeps you moving." Anton had stopped ahead, waiting. When Marek looked up, he saw concern in the man's eyes. They both knew what this was. The breaking point. The moment where people quit or keep going, and that choice determines everything. "Can he make it?" Anton asked. "He'll make it," Marek said firmly. Then to Ilya, "Won't you?" The boy nodded, wiping his face with a frozen sleeve. "Yes." "Then prove it. One foot in front of the other. Don't think about the destination. Just think about the next step. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Then do it." They walked. The storm raged around them, indifferent to their struggle, their pain, their stubborn refusal to quit. Hours blurred together. Marek lost track of time, focused only on keeping Ilya moving, keeping himself moving, following Anton's broad back through the endless white. At some point, impossible to say when, the trees began to thin. The ground leveled out, and through the snow, Marek caught glimpses of something dark and angular. Man-made. A structure. "There," Anton shouted, pointing. The truck sat exactly where he'd left it, half buried in snow but intact. It was an old military transport, the kind that could handle brutal terrain and worse weather. Anton had winterized it, packed the engine with insulation, kept the fuel from freezing. Within 20 minutes, he had it running, the engine coughing black smoke before settling into a rough idle. They climbed inside, and the relief was immediate and overwhelming. The cab was cold, but it was shelter, protection from the wind. Ilya collapsed against Marek, shivering violently. Marek held him close, sharing body heat while Anton worked to get the heater functioning. "How long was that?" Ilya asked through chattering teeth. Marek checked his watch. 14 hours. They'd been walking for 14 hours straight through some of the worst conditions he'd seen in decades. The boy had kept pace the entire time, never once asking to stop, never once giving up. "Long enough," Marek said. "You did well. I thought I was going to die." "We all did. But thinking about dying and actually dying are two different things. You learned that today." The heater kicked in, blowing air that was barely warmer than outside, but getting better by the minute. Anton produced a thermos from somewhere, poured hot tea that must have gone lukewarm hours ago, but tasted like salvation anyway. "We'll rest here for 2 hours," Anton said. "Let the storm pass. Let the boy recover. Then we drive for the rail line. Should reach it by tomorrow evening if the roads are passable." "And if they're not?" Ilya asked. "Then we find another way. There's always another way." They drank the tea in silence, listening to the storm batter the truck. Gradually, feeling returned to Marek's extremities, bringing pain and then relief. Ilya fell asleep against his shoulder, exhausted but safe. Marek let him sleep. The boy had earned it. Anton sat behind the wheel, staring out at the whiteness beyond the windshield. "You raised him well," he said quietly. I'm trying. My father would have liked him, would have liked to meet him. Will he be able to speak when we get there? Some days are better than others. The morphine helps with the pain but clouds his mind. But he's been lucid lately, waiting. He knows I'm close, knows I found you. How? I called the hospital yesterday, before I came to your cabin, told them I'd located you. They told my father. He cried, apparently. First time the nurses had seen him cry since the diagnosis. Marek absorbed this. A dying man crying because someone from 50 years ago had been found. The weight of that gratitude felt crushing. I don't deserve his tears, Marek said. That's not for you to decide. He lived a full life because of your choice. Had children, grandchildren, taught thousands of students. All of it circles back to that one moment, to you. Whether you think you deserve gratitude or not, he's giving it. The question is whether you're strong enough to receive it. I've killed 206 men, I know. You've said it a dozen times now, but you also saved one. And that one became hundreds more through the life he lived, the family he raised, the students he taught. Your arithmetic is incomplete, Volkov. You're counting deaths, but not calculating life. That's a mistake. Marek wanted to argue, but exhaustion was overtaking him. His eyes grew heavy, the warmth of the truck, the sound of the storm, Ilya's steady breathing, all of it pulled him towards sleep. He fought it for a while, old instincts warning against dropping your guard. But eventually, inevitably, he surrendered. He dreamed of snow and silence, of a tower and a scope, and a boy holding a photograph. But in the dream, when he pulled the trigger, nothing happened. The rifle wouldn't fire. And the boy looked up at him across 800 meters and smiled, just smiled, then turned and walked away, footprints disappearing in the snow. When Marek woke, the storm had passed. Pale sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating a world transformed. Everything was white and clean and crystalline, beautiful in the way that deadly things often were. Anton was already outside, clearing snow from the truck. Ilya stirred, sat up, looked around with the confusion of someone waking in an unfamiliar place. "Where are we?" the boy asked. "Halfway to the rest of our lives," Marek said. "Come on, time to move." They drove south through landscape that shifted from wilderness to rural to something approaching civilization. Small villages appeared, then towns. Roads became more defined. Other vehicles passed them, trucks, cars, buses full of people living ordinary lives, unburdened by 50-year-old debts. Ilya pressed his face to the window, watching everything with wide eyes. He'd never been this far from the wilderness, had never seen this many people in one place. The boy asked 1,000 questions. What's that building? Why are those people dressed like that? Why do the cars move so fast? And Mark answered as best he could, relearning the world himself through his grandson's wonder. They reached the rail line by dusk the next day, just as Anton had predicted. The station was a small concrete building surrounded by frozen platforms and rust-streaked tracks. A handful of people waited for the evening train, bundled against the cold, smoking cigarettes and checking watches with the impatience of those who had somewhere to be. Anton purchased tickets while Marek and Ilya waited outside. The boy was nervous now, fidgeting with his coat buttons, looking around at everything and nothing. "I've never been on a train," Ilya said. "You'll like it. It's like riding in a truck, except longer and louder." "How long to Moscow?" 2 days if we're lucky, 3 if the weather turns again. "And when we get there, what happens?" Marek didn't have a good answer for that. He'd been asking himself the same question since they left the cabin. What happened when he finally stood face to face with Dmitry Petrov? What did you say to a man whose life you'd saved but never expected to see again? Thank you for living? I'm sorry for all the others? The equations didn't balance, and Marek had never been good with emotional mathematics. "We'll figure it out when we get there," he said finally. The train arrived with a screech of brakes and a blast of steam. It was old, Soviet era, the kind of rolling stock that had been in service for decades and would probably continue for decades more. They boarded with a dozen other passengers, finding seats in a car that smelled of diesel and old tobacco. As the train pulled away from the station, Marek watched the wilderness recede through the window. His wilderness. His home for 50 years. It looked smaller from here, less imposing, just trees and snow and the endless white. He wondered if he'd ever see it again, or if this journey was one way, leading him toward some conclusion he couldn't predict or control. Ilya fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the past 2 days. Anton produced a deck of cards and asked if Marek played. They played in silence, betting with matchsticks, neither one really caring who won. It was just something to do with their hands while their minds processed what lay ahead. "Tell me about your family," Marek said after the third hand. "You mentioned children." "2 daughters, both grown now. One's a doctor in St. Petersburg. The other teaches like my father did. Mathematics." "Are they married?" "The doctor is. Has 2 boys of her own. The teacher says she's married to her work." Anton smiled. "Sounds familiar, doesn't it? My father was the same way, always grading papers, always preparing lessons. Even when he got sick, he kept teaching, tutored students from his hospital bed until he got too weak." "What does he teach now?" "Nothing. Just waits, thinks, remembers. He's made his peace with dying, I think. But he couldn't make peace with never meeting you. That's what's kept him going these past months. The hope that I'd find you, that he'd get this one last chance." "I'm not what he remembers," Mark said quietly. "The man in that tower was young, scared, trying to survive. I'm old now, different. He knows that. He's old too. But some things don't age. Some moments stay frozen in time exactly as they were. And that moment, when you let him live, that's frozen for both of you. Everything else is just context." The train rocked on through the night, carrying them south toward Moscow, toward the past, toward a reckoning 50 years in the making. Marek tried to sleep but couldn't. His mind kept returning to that tower, that scope, that impossible choice. He'd been so certain it was weakness at the time, a failure of discipline, a crack in the armor he'd built around himself. But what if Anton was right? What if it hadn't been weakness but clarity? The sudden ability to see through all the propaganda and orders and justifications to the simple truth underneath? This was a boy who wanted to go home, and Marek had the power to let him. Morning came cold and gray. The train had stopped at several stations during the night, picking up and dropping off passengers. The car was fuller now, crowded with people traveling to the capital for work or business or reasons they kept to themselves. Marek felt exposed among them, like his past was visible on his skin, marking him as different, dangerous. But nobody looked at him twice. To them, he was just another old man traveling with his grandson. Ordinary, forgettable. The ghost had truly died, replaced by someone so mundane he was invisible. Ilya woke hungry. Anton shared bread and dried meat from his pack, and they ate while watching the landscape change outside. More towns now, factories, signs of industry and habitation, the wilderness giving way to something organized, controlled, human. "Have you been to Moscow before?" Ilya asked Marek. "Once. Long ago. I didn't like it." "Why not?" "Too many people. Too much noise. Everything moving too fast, everyone wanting something from you. In the wilderness, things are simple. You hunt, you gather, you survive. In cities, nothing is simple. Everything is complicated by politics and money and 1,000 small betrayals. But people need cities, don't they? Some people do. They need the noise and the crowds because silence scares them. Being alone with themselves scares them. But that's not strength. That's fear dressed up as civilization." Anton spoke up from across the aisle. "My father would disagree with you. He loved the city, said it was where ideas were born, where people came together to build something bigger than themselves." "And what did they build?" Marek asked. "Wars, weapons, machines designed to kill more efficiently. That's what cities produce, death at scale. They also produce art, music, literature, medicine, everything that makes life worth living beyond mere survival. Survival is enough. For you, maybe. But my father wanted more. Wanted to teach, to shape young minds, to pass on knowledge. You can't do that alone in a cabin. Can't you? I'm teaching Ilya. Survival skills, useful, yes. But what about history, philosophy, mathematics, all the accumulated wisdom of humanity? He needs that too." Marek looked at his grandson, who was listening intently to this debate. The boy's eyes were bright with curiosity, that hunger for knowledge that Marek had tried to suppress, tried to channel only toward practical matters. But maybe Anton had a point. Maybe teaching a boy to hunt and trap wasn't enough. Maybe there was more to life than just surviving it. When this is done, Marek said slowly, when we go back to the wilderness, maybe we bring some books. Teach him more than just tracking and trapping. Ilya's face lit up. Really? Really? But you still need to master the basics first. Reading won't keep you alive in a blizzard. But it might keep him alive in here, Anton said, tapping his temple. And that's just as important. The train rolled into Moscow on the third day, pulling into a station that was all concrete and steel and echoing announcements. The crowd surged around them as they disembarked, thousands of people moving with purpose and speed, everyone important, everyone late, everyone existing in their own private urgency. Marek held tight to Ilya's hand, not wanting to lose the boy in the chaos. The noise was overwhelming after the silence of the wilderness. Voices, engines, the screech of brakes, the hiss of steam. It assaulted his senses from every direction. "This way," Anton said, leading them through the crowd toward the exit. Outside, the city spread before them in all its brutal grandeur. Buildings rose like concrete mountains blocking out the sky. Cars moved in rivers of metal and exhaust. People flowed along sidewalks like schools of fish, all moving together but somehow never touching. It was organized chaos, the kind that passed for normal in places like this. They took a taxi to the hospital, a 20-minute drive through streets that Marek half recognized from 50 years ago. Some buildings were the same, others were new. But the feel of the place, the weight of it, the density, that hadn't changed. Moscow was still Moscow, still hungry, still consuming everything it touched. The hospital was a modern building on the city's eastern edge, all glass and clean lines. Inside, it smelled of disinfectant and sickness. That particular odor of places where people came to fight death and usually lost. Marek had smelled it before, in field hospitals during the war. The smell never changed, only the technology around it. Anton spoke to a nurse at the desk, showed identification, explained their presence. The nurse made a phone call, nodded, then gestured toward the elevator. "Fourth floor," she said. "Room 412, but please, he tires easily. Keep it brief." They rode the elevator in silence. Marek could feel his heart pounding, could feel the weight of 50 years pressing against his chest. This was it. The moment he'd been avoiding, running from, trying to forget. No more distance, no more wilderness to hide in. Just truth and consequence and a dying man's gratitude. The elevator doors opened. Anton led them down a hallway that was too bright, too white, too clean. Room numbers passed. 408, 410, 412. Anton stopped, turned to Marek. "Ready?" he asked. Marek wasn't. Knew he'd never be. But he nodded anyway. Anton knocked twice, then opened the door. The room was small and sparse. Medical equipment beeped quietly. An IV stand held bags of fluid. And in the bed, propped up on pillows, was a man who looked like he'd already died but hadn't gotten the message yet. Dmitry Petrov was skeletal. The cancer had eaten him from the inside out, leaving only skin stretched over bone. His hair was gone. His eyes were sunken. But when he saw Marek standing in the doorway, those eyes widened, and something like joy, actual joy, flickered across that dying face. "You came," Dmitry said. His voice was barely a whisper, rough from the tubes that had been down his throat. "I didn't think. Anton said you would, but I didn't dare believe." Marek stood frozen. This man, this dying man, he was the boy in the scope, the photograph, the impossible choice, except he wasn't a boy anymore. He was old and broken and using his last breaths to smile at someone he hadn't seen in 50 years. "Hello, Dmitry," Marek said. It was all he could manage. Dmitry's smile widened. "The ghost, the legend. You're real. You're here." "I'm here. Come closer, please. I want to see you properly." Marek moved to the bedside. Ilya followed, staying close. Behind them, Anton closed the door, giving them privacy. Dmitry reached out with a trembling hand. Marek took it, felt the bones beneath the papery skin, felt the weakness of a man measured in days, not years. I've waited so long, Dmitri said. Looked for you everywhere, asked everyone, followed every rumor. And here you are, finally, after all this time. I'm sorry you had to search, Marek said. I wasn't trying to be found. I know, Anton told me. You wanted to disappear, to forget. But I needed you to know, needed you to see what your choice created. I see a dying man. No, Dmitri shook his head weakly. You see a man who lived, who got 66 years he never should have had. A man who fell in love, raised children, taught thousands of students. A man who got to be human because you chose mercy when killing was easier. It wasn't easier, Marek said quietly. It was the hardest thing I ever did. I know. That's why it mattered. Easy choices don't change anything. Hard choices, choices that cost you something, those are the ones that echo. And yours echoed across half a century to bring you here, to let me say thank you. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Because you gave me everything, my wife, my daughters, my grandchildren, every lesson I taught, every student I helped, every moment of joy and sorrow in ordinary life. All of it exists because you pulled your finger off that trigger. Dmitri's eyes filled with tears. Do you know what that photograph was? The one I stopped to pick up? Marek shook his head. My mother and my baby sister, Anna. She was 6 years old. I was carrying that picture because it was the only thing from home I had. And when it fell, I knew I was dead. Knew someone was watching, but I couldn't leave it. Couldn't abandon them, even for a photograph. So I stopped, said goodbye, made peace, and then nothing. No bullet, no death, just you, shouting at me to run, to go home. Go home, boy, Marek whispered. Yes, those 3 words. They changed everything. I ran, got back to my unit, survived the siege, and when the war ended, I went home, to my mother, to Anna. They were still alive, still waiting, and I got to see them again because of you. Dmitri coughed, a wet, rattling sound. A nurse appeared from somewhere, checked his monitors, adjusted his medication. She looked at Anton with concern. Just a few more minutes, Anton said. Please. The nurse hesitated, then nodded and left. Dmitri's breathing steadied. He looked at Ilya, who'd been standing silent through all of this. Is this your grandson? Dmitri asked. Yes, this is Ilya. Come here, boy. Ilya approached the bed. Dmitri studied him with those sunken eyes. You look like him, Dmitri said. Same eyes, same strength. Your grandfather is a good man. Do you know that? He tells me he was a killer, Ilya said honestly. He was, but he was also capable of mercy. And that mercy is why I'm here. Why my children exist. Why my grandchildren exist. Never forget that, boy. Your grandfather gave my family life. That makes you part of that gift too. We're connected now. Forever. Ilya looked at Marek, then back at Dmitri. I'll remember. Good. Dmitri settled back against his pillows, exhausted from the conversation. Anton. The box. Anton moved to a small table by the window and retrieved a wooden box. He brought it to the bed, placed it in his father's hands. Open it, Dmitri said to Marek. Marek took the box, lifted the lid. Inside was the photograph, faded, creased, worn from decades of handling. 2 women stood in front of a simple house, one middle-aged, one a small girl, both smiling. My mother died 10 years ago, Dmitri said. Anna lives in the old village still, has 5 children of her own, 14 grandchildren, all because I made it home. All because you let me. Beneath the photograph was a folded piece of paper. Marek unfolded it. It was a list. Names. Hundreds of names. My students, Dmitri explained. Every student I taught in 40 years. All the lives I touched. All the minds I shaped. Every one of them exists in some small way because you chose mercy. That's your legacy, Volkov. Not the 206 you killed. This list, these lives. Mark stared at the names. They swam before his eyes, blurring. His hands shook. I don't, he started, but couldn't finish. You do, Dmitri said firmly. You deserve to know, to understand. Your choice wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing you ever did. And it mattered. It still matters. The room went quiet except for the beeping of machines and Dmitri's labored breathing. Marek held the box, held the weight of all those names, all those lives, all that impossible mathematics. Thank you, Dmitri whispered. Thank you for my life, for everything that came after, for the chance to be human in a world that tried to make us all monsters. Thank you. And then, because he couldn't think of anything else to say, anything that would capture the enormity of this moment, Marek simply said, You're welcome. Dmitri smiled, closed his eyes, and for a moment, in that sterile hospital room, he looked peaceful, complete, like a man who'd finally found what he'd been searching for. They sat with Dmitri for another hour, while his breathing grew shallower and his words came slower, separated by longer pauses. The morphine was pulling him under, dragging him towards sleep or something deeper, but he fought it, kept his eyes open, kept talking in fragments and whispers about the life he'd lived, the wife he'd loved, the children he'd raised. Every sentence was a gift, handed to Marek like evidence in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. Elena, Dmitri murmured at one point. My wife. You would have liked her. She was fierce, like fire. When I told her about you, about the ghost who let me live, she cried. Said she wanted to find you, to thank you herself. But I told her no. Said some debts couldn't be repaid face to face, that gratitude this big needed distance. Was I wrong? Marek looked at this dying man, at the tears tracking down his hollow cheeks, and felt something crack open in his chest. No, you weren't wrong. I couldn't have handled this. Not then. Maybe not even now. But you're here. I'm here. That's all that matters. That you came, that you let me see you one last time before... Dmitri's voice broke. He coughed again, weaker this time. The nurse returned, checked his vitals with growing concern. He needs to rest, she said firmly. I'm sorry, but you need to leave. He's exhausted. Anton nodded, but Dmitri reached out, grabbed his son's hand with surprising strength. No, not yet. Please, just a few more minutes. The nurse looked ready to argue, but something in Dmitri's eyes stopped her. She adjusted his IV instead, increased something in the drip. 5 minutes. No more. When she left, Dmitri turned his gaze back to Marek. There's something else. Something I need you to understand. What? You think you're a killer. That's how you define yourself. 206 dead men. But that's not who you are. That's what the war made you do. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, because when you had the choice, when no one was watching, when no one would have questioned it, you chose differently. You chose life over death, mercy over efficiency. That's who you really are. Not the ghost, not the machine, just a man who understood, even for a moment, that we're all just trying to get home. Marek wanted to argue, wanted to explain that it hadn't been that simple, that the choice had been instinct, not philosophy, weakness, not strength, but the words wouldn't come. Because maybe Dmitri was right. Maybe in that frozen moment, finger on the trigger, breath held, he'd finally seen clearly, had finally understood that the boy in his scope was just another version of himself, scared, lost, wanting desperately to survive long enough to see home again. I need to ask you something, Marek said quietly, and I need the truth. Anything. Do you blame me? For the others? The 206 who didn't get the chance you got? Dmitri closed his eyes, considering. When he opened them again, they were wet but clear. No, I don't blame you. They were soldiers. You were a soldier. That's what war is. Soldiers killing soldiers until someone decides it's over. You were following orders, doing your duty. The only miracle is that you stopped, that you found a way to break the pattern, even just once. That's not something to blame. That's something to honor. I've never been able to forgive myself for it. For sparing me? For all of it. The killing, the mercy, the arithmetic that doesn't balance. I've carried it for 50 years and I still don't understand why I pulled the trigger 206 times but couldn't do it the 207th. Maybe you don't need to understand, Dmitri said. Maybe you just need to accept that in a world of death, you chose life. Once. and that once was enough to matter, to create all this. He gestured weakly at the room, at Anton, at the box of names. You can't undo the past, can't bring back the dead, but you can acknowledge what your mercy created, and maybe find some peace in knowing that your hardest choice was also your best one. The 5 minutes were up. The nurse returned with 2 orderlies and a doctor. They were polite but firm. Dmitri needed rest. The visitors needed to leave. Now. Dmitri gripped Marek's hand one final time. Will you come back? Tomorrow? I'd like to talk more. About the war. About after. About everything. Marek looked at Anton, who nodded slightly. I'll come back, Marek said. Promise? I promise. Dmitri smiled, and in that smile, Marek saw the ghost of the 16-year-old boy who'd stood in the snow clutching a photograph. Still there, still alive beneath the wreckage of cancer and time. Good, Dmitri whispered. That's good. They left the room. The door closed behind them with a soft click. In the hallway, Marek stood still for a long moment, just breathing, trying to process everything. Ilya stayed close, his small hand finding Marek's. Are you all right, grandfather? The boy asked. I don't know, Marek said honestly. I really don't know. They walked through the hospital corridors in silence, past rooms full of other dying people, other families holding vigil, other stories playing out their final chapters. The weight of it all pressed down on Marek like the storm they'd walked through days ago. Heavy, relentless, unavoidable. Outside, Moscow's evening rush had begun. Cars honked. People hurried past. The city moved and churned and consumed, indifferent to the small drama that had just played out on the 4th floor of a hospital on its eastern edge. There's a hotel nearby, Anton said. Nothing fancy, but clean. I've booked rooms for us. We can rest, eat, talk, then come back tomorrow. How long does he have? Marek asked. Anton's face tightened. Days. Maybe a week if he's strong. The doctor told me this morning the cancer has spread to his liver. His kidneys are failing, they're keeping him comfortable, but there's nothing else they can do. Does he know? Yes. He's known for months. That's why he pushed me so hard to find you. Why he couldn't let it go. This was his last chance. They walked to the hotel, checked in, climbed stairs to rooms that smelled of old carpet and industrial soap. Anton said he needed to make some calls, to check on his family, to update them on his father's condition. He disappeared into his room, leaving Marek and Ilya alone. The room was small but adequate. 2 beds, a window overlooking a street filled with traffic and neon. Ilya sat on one bed, looking around with the same wide-eyed wonder he'd shown on the train. Everything here was new to him, foreign, exciting in ways that made Marek realize how isolated he'd kept the boy. What did you think? Marek asked. Of Dmitri? Of all of it? Ilya was quiet for a moment, processing. I think he was telling the truth, about being grateful, about what your choice meant. And what do you think my choice meant? I think, Ilya paused, choosing his words carefully. I think it meant you're not just a survivor. You're someone who understands that surviving isn't enough, that how you survive matters just as much. When did you get so wise? You ask me that a lot, Ilya said with a small smile. Maybe I was always this wise and you just weren't listening. Maybe. They ordered food from a place down the street, hot soup and bread that tasted like civilization, rich and overseasoned and nothing like what they ate in the wilderness. Ilya devoured his portion, still hungry from the journey. Marek picked at his, appetite gone, replaced by a churning in his stomach that might have been guilt or grief or something else entirely. Tell me about the 206, Ilya said suddenly. Marek looked up. Why? Because you keep mentioning them, counting them, carrying them. But I don't know who they were, what they looked like, if you remember any of them. I remember all of them. All 206? Every single one. Marek set down his spoon. That's the curse of being a sniper. You see their faces. Through the scope, you're close enough to see everything. The fear, the surprise, the moment when life becomes death. You can't not remember. Tell me about one. Just one. Marek closed his eyes, and the faces came flooding back. A parade of the dead, frozen in their final moments. He sorted through them, looking for one that wouldn't haunt him worse than the others. Finally settled on number 43. There was an officer, Marek began. A lieutenant, I think. Young. Maybe 25. He used to stand on this balcony every morning at dawn, drinking coffee and smoking. Same spot, same time. For 3 days, I watched him, studied his routine, waited for the perfect shot. Why did you wait? Because that's what snipers do. We don't take the first shot we see. We wait for certainty. For the moment when everything aligns, wind, light, distance, target. On the 4th morning, everything was perfect. He stepped onto the balcony, lit his cigarette, took a sip of coffee, and I fired. Did you kill him? Instantly. He never knew what happened. One moment he was alive, thinking about whatever lieutenants think about. The next he was gone. His coffee cup fell, shattered on the concrete below. I watched through my scope as his men ran out, tried to help him, but there was nothing to help. He was already gone. Do you regret it? I regret all of it, but that one especially because I'd watched him, seen him as a person. He liked his coffee black, smoked cheap cigarettes, had a habit of checking his watch every few minutes like he was worried about being late for something. I knew these things about him, and I killed him anyway. That's what makes it unforgivable. But it was war. You were following orders. That's what they tell you, but that orders absolve you. But they don't. Every trigger pull was a choice. Every death was on me, regardless of what some commander hundreds of miles away decided. I chose to pull that trigger 206 times, and then, with Dmitri, I chose not to. That's what I can't reconcile. Why him? What made him different from the lieutenant with his coffee, or the machine gunner I killed on day 12, or any of the others? Maybe he wasn't different, Ilya said quietly. Maybe you were. Maybe by the time you saw him, you'd finally had enough of being the machine. Maybe you were ready to be human again, and he just happened to be the one in your sights when that moment came. Marek stared at his grandson, 12 years old and seeing things with a clarity that Marek had lost decades ago, or maybe had never had. You remind me of your mother, Marek said. She used to say things like that, cut through all the complexity to the simple truth underneath. I wish I'd known her. So do I. She would have been proud of you. They finished eating in silence. Later, they tried to sleep, but Marek couldn't. He lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the city's night sounds, sirens, voices, the constant hum of traffic. So different from the wilderness where the only sounds were wind and animals and the occasional crack of ice settling. Here, the noise never stopped. The city never slept. It just kept churning, processing, consuming. Around 3 a.m, Marek gave up on sleep and went to the window. The street below was still busy, people still moving. Where were they all going at this hour? What drove them out into the cold and dark? Can't sleep either? Marek turned. Ilya was sitting up in his bed watching. Too much noise, Marek said. I kind of like it. Makes me feel less alone. In the wilderness, you're never alone. Everything is connected. The trees, the animals, even the silence. But here, Marek gestured at the window. Here everyone is alone together, moving past each other, never really connecting. Is that why you left? After the war? Part of it. I couldn't stand the crowds. Couldn't handle being surrounded by people who had no idea what war was really like. They'd thank me for my service, ask me if I'd killed anyone, treat it all like some adventure story. But they didn't want the truth. Didn't want to hear about the cold or the fear or the faces. They wanted heroes and villains and simple narratives. I didn't fit their story, so I left. And built the cabin. Created a life where the rules were clear and the enemies were honest. The cold didn't lie. The hunger didn't pretend. Either you survived or you didn't, and that was all there was to it. But Dmitri's right, isn't he? You can't just survive. You have to have a reason to survive, something beyond just making it to tomorrow. Marek returned to his bed, sat on the edge. What's your reason for wanting to survive? Ilya thought about this. I want to learn, want to understand the world, Want to be more than just someone who knows how to trap rabbits and split firewood. No offense. None taken. You should want more. Your mother did. She left the wilderness for the city, met your father, built a different kind of life. I thought she was making a mistake, choosing complexity over simplicity. But maybe she understood something I didn't, that surviving isn't enough, that you need purpose, connection, something to fight for beyond just staying alive another day. Do you have that? A reason? I thought I did. Thought teaching you to survive was enough. But seeing Dimitri today, seeing what my choice created, maybe I've been surviving instead of living. Maybe I've been hiding instead of healing. So what do we do? After this? After Dimitri, I don't know yet, but I think we need to find out, together. Morning came gray and cold, Moscow waking slowly under a ceiling of low clouds. They ate breakfast at a cafe near the hotel, hot tea and pastries that Ilya declared the best thing he'd ever tasted. Marek watched the boy eat with the enthusiasm of someone discovering pleasure for the first time, and felt a pang of guilt. How much had he denied this child in the name of teaching him to survive? Anton met them at the hospital entrance. He looked tired, like he'd slept even less than Marek. "How is he?" Marek asked. "Fading. The doctors say his organs are shutting down. It could be today, could be tomorrow, but soon." Anton's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. This was his father dying, and all the preparation in the world couldn't make that easier. They took the elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway seemed longer today, the lights harsher. At room 412, Anton paused. "He's been asking for you since dawn. Wouldn't rest until I promised you were coming." I promised I would. I know, but he needed to hear it again, needed to know it was real. They entered the room. Dimitri looked worse than yesterday, grayer, thinner, more translucent, like he was already halfway gone, held to this world by will alone. But when he saw Marek, his eyes brightened. "You came back," Dimitri whispered. "I keep my promises." A rare quality, especially in men who've seen what we've seen. Marek pulled a chair close to the bed. Ilya took another chair by the window, giving them space but staying close enough to hear. Anton stood by the door, guardian and witness. "I've been thinking," Dimitri said, "about what you asked yesterday, about forgiveness, about the 206, and I realized something." "What?" "They're not your burden alone. They're the war's burden, the politicians who started it, the generals who planned it, the machine that consumed all of us and spit out corpses. You were just one small part of that machine. And the moment you stepped outside of it, the moment you chose mercy, you stopped being part of it. You became something else, something better." "I don't feel better." "Of course not, because you're a good man. Good men carry guilt even when they shouldn't. Bad men shed it like water. The fact that you've carried this for 50 years tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." "And who is that?" "Someone who understands the weight of choice. Someone who knows that every action has consequences. Someone who, when given the hardest test of his life, chose compassion over efficiency. That's not a small thing, Marek. That's everything." A nurse entered, checked Dimitri's monitors, whispered something to Anton. He nodded, whispered back. She left, closing the door softly behind her. "They want to increase the morphine again," Dimitri said. "Take away the pain. But it'll take away my clarity too. My time. So I need to say this now, while I still can." He reached for the wooden box on the bedside table. Anton handed it to him. Dimitri opened it, took out the photograph, held it up. "This picture saved my life. But you saved everything that came after. My mother got to see me again. My sister grew up with her big brother. I met Elena, had children, grandchildren, taught thousands of students, lived 66 years that should have ended at 16. All of it traces back to you, to that one choice. I was just tired of killing. Maybe. But maybe it was more than that. Maybe you saw something in me that reminded you why we fight in the first place. Not to kill, not to conquer, but to protect, to preserve, to give people like me the chance to go home and build lives worth living." Dimitri's hand shook as he held the photograph. "My sister Anna. She's coming tomorrow. I called her last night, told her about you. She cried, said she wanted to meet you, to thank you herself. Will you stay? Will you meet her? Mark hesitated. Meeting Dmitri had been hard enough. Meeting his sister, seeing another life his choice had preserved, might be more than he could handle. I'll stay, he said anyway. Because what else could he say? No? Refuse the dying wish of a man he'd saved 50 years ago? Thank you. Dmitri closed his eyes, exhausted from the short conversation. I'm tired now, so tired. But I'm glad you're here. Glad I got to see you, to know you're real, that the ghost was a man, not a myth. Rest, Mark said. I'll be here when you wake up. Promise? Promise. Dmitri smiled, still holding the photograph, and drifted towards sleep. His breathing steadied. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, life persisting against odds, same as it always had. They left him sleeping and found a waiting room down the hall. Anton collapsed into a chair, put his head in his hands. The weight of watching his father die was showing now, cracks in the controlled facade he'd maintained. I'm sorry, Marek said. For what? For not being found sooner. For making him search so long. For… Stop, Anton interrupted. You have nothing to apologize for. You gave my father everything. The life he lived. The family he raised. All of it started with you. The fact that he got to meet you before the end? That's more than most dying men get. Closure, completion. A chance to say thank you to the person who mattered most. You gave him that. Don't apologize for it. They sat in silence for a while. Ilya explored the waiting room, picked up magazines, looked at paintings on the wall, watched other families come and go. Learning about grief by observing it in others. Another lesson the wilderness couldn't teach. Around noon, a woman arrived. She was in her 60s, with gray hair and eyes that matched Dmitri's. She moved with purpose, found Anton immediately. How is he? She asked. Sleeping, stable for now, but soon. The woman nodded, accepting this. Then she turned to Marek, and her eyes filled with tears. You're him, she said. The ghost. The one who saved my brother. My name is Marek. I'm Anna, Dmitri's sister. The one in the photograph. She moved closer, studying his face like she was trying to memorize it. He described you, said you had steady hands and sad eyes. He was right. I'm sorry about your brother. Don't be. He lived a full life, a good life, all because of you, because you saw him as a person instead of a target. Do you know what that means to me? To know that someone showed mercy when they could have just as easily killed? I don't. It means everything, Anna interrupted. It means my brother came home. Means I got to grow up with him. Means my children got to know their uncle. Means his children exist. His grandchildren. All the lives he touched as a teacher. The ripples go on, spreading out from that one moment when you chose not to pull the trigger. Can you understand that? Can you see what you created? Marek looked at this woman, at the tears streaming down her face, at the gratitude radiating from her like heat. And for the first time in 50 years, he felt something shift. The weight didn't disappear. The guilt didn't vanish. But something eased. Some small part of him that had been clenched tight for decades relaxed just slightly. I'm beginning to, he said quietly. Anna reached out, took his hand, held it between both of hers. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for giving me my brother, for giving me my life. Thank you. And Marek, who hadn't cried since the war ended, who'd locked all emotion away in service of survival, felt his eyes burn with tears he couldn't stop. The tears came slowly at first, then harder, breaking through 50 years of frozen control. Marek didn't try to stop them, didn't have the strength to fight them anymore. Anna held his hand through it all, this woman he'd saved without knowing it, without ever meeting, and she cried with him. Two strangers bound by a single moment of mercy, finally meeting across the vast distance of time. Ilya watched from across the room, eyes wide. He'd never seen his grandfather cry, had probably thought the old man incapable of it. But here was proof that beneath all that discipline and hardness, there was still something human, still something that could break. When the tears finally stopped, Marek pulled his hand away gently, wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. I'm sorry. I don't usually… Don't apologize, Anna said firmly. You've earned the right to feel this, to let it out. Carrying that weight alone for so long, I can't imagine. I didn't know how else to carry it. I know, Dmitri told me. Said you disappeared after the war. Went into the wilderness to hide from what you'd done. But you weren't hiding from what you'd done. You were hiding from what you couldn't forgive yourself for. Same thing. No, it's not. What you did, killing those soldiers, that was war. Terrible, but war. What you couldn't forgive yourself for was showing mercy. For breaking the pattern. For proving you were still human when it would have been easier to stay a machine. That's what haunted you, not the deaths. The life you spared. Marek looked at her, this perceptive woman who understood him better after 10 minutes than he'd understood himself in 50 years. How did you know? Because Dmitri spent 66 years trying to understand it too, trying to figure out why you let him live when you could have easily killed him. He studied philosophy, psychology, history, searching for an answer. And eventually he realized there is no rational answer. You didn't spare him because of strategy or orders or tactical advantage. You spared him because in that moment you saw yourself. Saw a scared boy who just wanted to go home. And you chose compassion over duty. That's not something to forgive yourself for. That's something to honor. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Dmitri asked me to give you this. He's been working on it for years. Wanted to make sure you had it in case he didn't get enough time to explain everything. Marek took the folder, opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Dmitri as a young man, arm around a beautiful woman, Elena, his wife. Dmitri holding a baby, 2 babies, his daughters. More photos. Graduations, weddings, grandchildren being born, a life documented in frozen moments. And beneath each photo, a handwritten note. The first one read, "My wedding day, October 1979. None of this happens without you." Another. Anna's daughter, Maria. Born 1982. She became a doctor. Saved lives because you saved mine. Another. Teaching my first class. September 1981. I taught history so students would understand the cost of war, so they'd know that every soldier is someone's son, someone's brother. You taught me that. Marek flipped through them, one after another, this cascade of life and joy and ordinary moments that all traced back to one decision. The mathematics were overwhelming. Not 206 deaths versus 1 life. 206 deaths versus hundreds of lives. Maybe thousands, counting students and their children, and everyone touched by Dmitri's existence. He wanted you to see, Anna said quietly. Wanted you to understand that your choice created all of this. Every smile, every milestone, every moment of happiness in these photos exists because you pulled your finger off that trigger. I don't deserve this. Deserve has nothing to do with it. This is what happened. This is what your mercy created. You can accept it or reject it, but you can't change it. It's real. It's true. And it matters. They sat together looking through the photos while Anton went to check on his father. Ilya moved closer, studying the images over Marek's shoulder. He had a good life, the boy said. Yes, Anna agreed. He did. Not easy. He struggled with what he'd seen in the war. Had nightmares, depression, but he worked through it, became stronger for it, and he never ever forgot the gift he'd been given. Every January 14th, he'd light a candle, say a prayer for the ghost who let him live, and for all the soldiers who didn't make it home. What will you do? Marek asked. After he's gone? Keep living. Keep honoring his memory by living well. That's all we can do. Keep the chain going, keep creating more life, more joy, more moments worth preserving. That's how we win against death. Not by avoiding it, but by making sure what we create outlasts what we lose. Anton returned, his face grave. He's awake, asking for you. Both of you. They went back to room 412. Dmitri looked even worse than before. The morphine had been increased and it showed in his glassy eyes and slack features. But he was conscious, present, fighting to stay a little longer. Anna, he whispered when he saw his sister. You came. Of course I came. Where else would I be? And Marek, still here. Good. That's good. His words were slurred now, the drugs doing their work. Need to tell you something. Important. I'm listening, Mark said, moving close to the bed. The list, in the box. Those names, they're not just my students, they're yours too. I don't understand. You taught me. Taught me that mercy matters, that choosing life over death is the hardest and best thing a man can do, and I taught them, passed it on. Your lesson through my voice. So they're yours, your legacy. Just like my children are yours, my grandchildren. All of it circles back to you. Dmitri, Listen, please, don't have much time. Dmitri's breathing was labored now. Each word cost him. Spent 50 years looking for you, wanting to say thank you, but that's not enough. Need you to understand, need you to forgive yourself. Can't die knowing you're still carrying that guilt. Please, let it go. You've earned peace. I killed 206 men and saved countless others through the one you spared. The arithmetic works, trust me. I've done the math. Every student I taught, every life they touched, it ripples outward, forever. You created that. You, not the war, not fate. You. Choose to see it, choose to accept it. Marek felt his throat tighten. I don't know if I can. Then learn. That's what I did. Learn to accept the gift you gave me. Learn to live without guilt for surviving when others didn't. Took years, decades, but I did it. You can too. You're stronger than you think. Dmitri reached out with a trembling hand. Marek took it, felt the weakness, the fading pulse. Thank you, Dmitri whispered, for my life, for everything. And I'm sorry. Sorry it took so long to find you. Sorry you carried this alone. But you don't have to anymore. You have Ilya, you have Anton, you have Anna, you have all of us. We're your family now, connected by that moment, that choice. We're here. You're not alone. I know, Marek said, and meant it. For the first time in 50 years, he meant it. Dmitri smiled, closed his eyes. Good. That's good. Can rest now, can finally rest. His hand went slack in Marek's grip. The monitors beeped steadily. He wasn't gone, not yet, but he was close. Fading into whatever came next, having said what he needed to say, having found what he needed to find. They stayed with him through the afternoon and into evening. Anna sat on one side of the bed, Marek on the other. Anton stood by the window. Ilya sat quietly in the corner, witness to this slow goodbye. The machines beeped. Dmitri breathed. The light outside shifted from afternoon gold to evening gray to the deep blue of twilight. Around 8 o'clock, the monitors changed their rhythm. The doctor came in, checked vitals, looked at Anton with sympathy and certainty. Soon, was all he said. Anna took her brother's hand. Marek took the other. They sat like that, holding him between them, anchoring him to this world for just a little longer. Tell me about him, Marek said to Anna. Tell me about the boy I saw in my scope. What was he like? Anna smiled through her tears. Brave, even as a child. Always protecting me. Always making sure I was safe. When the war started and they conscripted him, I was terrified. Begged him not to go. But he said he had to. Said someone had to fight so people like me could stay safe. He wrote me letters every week, told me about the cold and the fear and the friends he made, and then the letters stopped. For 2 months, nothing. Mother and I thought he was dead. The siege. Yes, communications were cut off. We had no way of knowing if he was alive or dead. Mother prayed every night. I was too young to understand prayer, but I made wishes. Childish things. Please let him come home. Please let me see him again. And then, in March, a letter arrived. Just a few lines. I'm alive. I'm coming home. Someone saved me when they didn't have to. I'll explain when I see you. That was all. And when he came home? He was different, older, haunted, had nightmares for years. But he was alive. And gradually, slowly, he found his way back, found purpose in teaching, found love in Elena, found joy in his daughters. The war never left him. I don't think it ever leaves anyone. But he learned to live alongside it, learned to find meaning in the life he'd been given. He said I taught him that, about mercy. You did, by example, by choosing it when killing was easier. He carried that lesson his whole life, taught it to everyone he met, that we always have a choice, even in the worst circumstances, even when the world is telling us to be brutal. We can choose compassion. We can choose to spare instead of destroy. It's harder. It costs more. But it's the choice that makes us human. The monitors beeped slower. Dimitri's breathing grew shallower. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. "I'm glad I found him," Marek said quietly. "Glad I came. I didn't want to. Didn't think I could face this. But I'm glad." "So is he. This is all he wanted, to meet you, to thank you, to help you understand. Mission accomplished." At 9:47 p.m., Dmitry Petrov took his last breath. No drama, no crisis, just a quiet exhalation that didn't have an inhalation following it. The monitors went flat. The doctor came in, confirmed what everyone already knew, noted the time. And just like that, the boy who'd stood in the snow clutching his mother's photograph was gone. Anna wept. Anton held his father's hand and said goodbye in Russian, words Marek didn't understand but felt anyway. Ilya watched from the corner, learning about death, not from animals or the wilderness, but from this, a man surrounded by people who loved him, dying with gratitude and peace. Marek sat very still holding Dmitri's hand, feeling the warmth fade from it. He thought about all the hands he'd never held, all the men who'd died alone in the snow, in trenches, in ruins, 206 final breaths he'd caused, none of them peaceful like this, none of them surrounded by love. But this one was. This one man got to live and love and die well because of a choice Marek had made in a moment of weakness that turned out to be strength. The arithmetic was still impossible, still unbalanced. But maybe that was the point. Maybe some things weren't meant to balance. Maybe mercy wasn't about mathematics at all, but about recognizing that every life mattered, even when the world was trying to teach you otherwise. They stayed in the room for another hour, saying their goodbyes in different ways. Then the hospital staff came to handle the necessary paperwork, the necessary procedures. Death required documentation, even peaceful death, even death that came as a relief. Outside, the Moscow night was cold and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Marek stood on the sidewalk, breathing the winter air, feeling emptied out and somehow lighter at the same time. "What happens now?" Ilya asked. "Now we go home," Marek said. "Back to the wilderness. Back to the cabin. But different than before." "How different?" "I don't know yet, but different." Anna joined them, wrapped in a heavy coat. "The funeral is in 3 days, in the village where we grew up. Will you come?" Marek hesitated. Attending the funeral meant more people, more gratitude, more weight. But it also meant witnessing the final chapter, seeing this story through to its end. "We'll come," he said. The funeral was held in a small church in a village that time seemed to have forgotten. Old wooden buildings, dirt roads, fields of snow stretching to the horizon. The church was packed, students, colleagues, family, friends. Everyone Dmitri had touched in 66 years of living. The service was in Russian, which Marek barely understood, but the emotion transcended language. People spoke about Dmitri the teacher, Dmitri the father, Dmitri the friend. They talked about his passion for history, his dedication to his students, his unwavering belief that education could change the world. No one mentioned the war except Anna, who told the story of her brother's salvation. Told it simply, without embellishment. A boy in a siege. A sniper who showed mercy. A life saved that rippled outward for decades. She looked at Marek when she said it, and 200 people turned to look at him too. He wanted to disappear, to run. But Ilya's hand found his, held tight, and Marek stayed. Accepted the looks, the nods, the quiet acknowledgments from people whose lives had been touched by his choice, however indirectly. After the service, they buried Dmitri in the village cemetery, next to his wife Elena, who died 5 years earlier. The ground was frozen hard, the grave already dug by men with picks and determination. They lowered the casket. A priest said words. People threw frozen earth on the lid, and it was done. Dmitry Petrov, saved at 16, dead at 66, was laid to rest. At the reception afterward, people approached Marek with stories Students who'd been inspired by Dimitri's teaching. Family members who'd never met the brother or uncle they'd heard about all their lives. Everyone had something to say, some gratitude to express. One young woman, maybe 25, stood nervously in front of Marek for a long moment before speaking. "My name is Maria," she said. "I'm Anna's granddaughter. Dimitri was my great-uncle. I'm a doctor now because he encouraged me. Told me I could save lives the way someone saved his. I just wanted to say thank you. You inspired my whole career without knowing I existed." Marek didn't know what to say to that, didn't have words big enough. So he just nodded, and Maria smiled and walked away, leaving him with the weight of her gratitude. "There are dozens more like her," Anton said, appearing at Marek's elbow. "People whose lives were shaped by my father's story, by your choice. You've created something bigger than you know. I just wanted to survive the war." And you did. But you also changed it, changed what war meant, at least for one person, showed that even in hell humanity can persist. That's not a small thing. They stayed in the village for 2 more days. Anna showed them the house where she and Dimitri had grown up, a simple wooden structure with a garden gone to winter sleep. She told stories about their childhood, about Dimitri teaching her to read, about him defending her from bullies, about the day the soldiers came and took him away. "I didn't understand war then," Anna said. "Thought it was something that happened far away, to other people. But it took my brother and almost didn't give him back. That's when I learned. War is intimate. It reaches into your home and takes what you love. And if you're very lucky, if someone shows mercy somewhere along the line, you get a piece of it back." On their last morning in the village, Anna gave Marek a package. "From Dimitri. He prepared this months ago, in case you came." Inside was a leather journal. Marek opened it, saw pages filled with Dimitri's handwriting, years of thoughts, reflections on the war, on survival, on the debt he felt he owed. The first entry was dated January 15th, 1975, the day after his life was spared. "I don't know who you are," it read. "Don't know your name or face. But you're out there somewhere, the ghost who let me live. And I need you to know your mercy wasn't weakness. It was strength. The strongest thing I've ever witnessed. Thank you. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your choice." The last entry was dated 2 weeks ago. "Marek," it began. "If you're reading this, Anton found you, and I've hopefully had the chance to meet you, to look you in the eye and say thank you. But in case I didn't say this clearly enough, you saved me. You changed me. You taught me that mercy is possible even in the darkest times. I've tried to pass that lesson on, tried to create ripples of compassion to match the ripples of violence. I hope I succeeded. I hope my life was worthy of your choice. Thank you for everything. Rest well, old friend. You've earned it." Marek closed the journal, vision blurred. Ilya was watching him, as was Anna. "He wanted you to have his story," Anna said. "The same way you gave him his life, fair trade." "More than fair," Marek managed. They left the village that afternoon, taking the train north toward the wilderness. The journey back was quieter than the journey down. Both Marek and Ilya were lost in thought, processing everything they'd seen and heard. "Are you all right?" Ilya asked, somewhere around hour 6. "I don't know. Ask me in a few months." "Do you still think you're just a killer?" Marek considered this. The old answer would have been yes, automatic, definitive. But now, "I think I'm someone who killed and someone who saved," he said finally. "Both things are true. Both things matter. And I need to learn to live with both. That's progress." "Is it?" "Yes. Before this you only claimed one half. Now you're claiming both. That's honest. That's brave." "When did you get so wise?" Marek asked again. Ilya grinned. "I have a good teacher, stubborn, broken, but good." They reached the wilderness 4 days later, hiking through snow that had covered their tracks from the journey out. The cabin stood exactly as they'd left it, smoke-stained and solid and home. Inside, Marek started a fire while Ilya unpacked their minimal supplies. They fell into old routines: water from the creek, wood from the stack, food from the stores. But everything felt different now. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. The isolation wasn't refuge. It was just, quiet, just distance. What do we do now? Ilya asked that night, the two of them sitting by the fire. We survive. Same as always. But different. But different, Marek agreed. We still hunt, still trap, still live by wilderness rules, but maybe we also read, study, learn things that don't directly relate to survival. Maybe we visit the village once a month, get books, meet people, connect to the world beyond these trees. You'd do that after avoiding it for 50 years? Dmitri was right. Surviving isn't enough. We need to live. Need to create something beyond just making it to tomorrow. And I can't teach you that alone. I don't know how, but maybe together we can figure it out. I'd like that. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance. Outside, the wilderness breathed and shifted, indifferent to human drama. But inside this cabin, something had changed. Some weight had been redistributed. Not gone, never gone, but shared now. Made bearable by understanding. Marek thought about the journal in his pack, about Dmitri's words, about the photographs of a life well lived, about Anna's tears and Maria's gratitude, and all the ripples spreading out from one moment of mercy. 206 men dead, one man saved, and through that one man, hundreds of lives touched. Thousands. The mathematics still didn't balance, but maybe Anton had been right. Maybe Marek had been counting wrong all along, counting deaths but not calculating life. Tell me something, Ilya said, breaking the silence. When you let Dmitri go, when you pulled your finger off the trigger, did you know? Did you understand what you were creating? No, I just knew I couldn't kill him, couldn't be the machine anymore. Everything else, Dmitri's life, his family, his students, I never imagined any of that. But it happened anyway. Your choice created all of it, whether you intended to or not. Yes. So maybe intention doesn't matter as much as we think. Maybe what matters is the choice itself, the action, the moment you decide to be merciful instead of brutal, even when brutal is easier. Marek looked at his grandson with pride and something like awe. How did you learn to see things so clearly? I watched you carry impossible weight for my whole life. Watched you teach me to survive but never to live. And then I watched you face your past and finally start healing. That's the lesson, not how to trap rabbits. How to be human when the world tries to make you something else. Your mother would be proud. So would Dmitri. They sat together as the fire burned down. Eventually they prepared for sleep. Tomorrow they'd check the trap lines, resume the routines. But everything would be different now, lighter somehow, more purposeful. Before he climbed into his bunk, Marek opened the journal one more time. Read that final entry again. Dmitri's words to him from beyond death. Rest well, old friend. You've earned it. For the first time in 50 years, Marek thought maybe he had. Not forgiveness, that might never come, and maybe it shouldn't, but understanding, acceptance, the ability to see his choice not as weakness, but as the hardest kind of strength. He closed the journal and put it on the shelf next to his rifle. Two tools, one for taking life, one for understanding it, both necessary, both true. Outside, snow began to fall, fresh powder covering old tracks, the wilderness erasing and renewing itself the way it always did. Inside, Marek lay in his bunk and let himself remember. Not just the killing, not just the guilt, but the boy with the photograph. The mercy shown, the life saved, the ripples created. 206 men who never came home. One boy who did. And through that one boy, a legacy of compassion that would outlive them all. The arithmetic would never balance. But maybe that was fine. Maybe mercy wasn't meant to balance anything. Maybe it was meant to break the pattern. To prove that even in the worst circumstances, humans could choose something better than brutality. Marek had made that choice, had lived with it, had run from it, and finally, after 50 years, had faced it. The ghost was dead, had been dead for decades. All that remained was Marek, broken, scarred, but finally healing. An old hunter in a frozen wilderness, teaching his grandson not just how to survive, but why survival mattered. Not for its own sake, but for what you did with it, how you chose to live, what you created in the space between death and the next death. Dmitri had understood that, had spent 66 years creating ripples of life to counter the ripples of death. And now, in his own way, Marek would too. would teach Ilya not just to trap and hunt, but to see the value in every life. To choose mercy when possible. To understand that the hardest choices were often the most important ones. Outside, the snow fell silently. Inside, Marek closed his eyes and let himself sleep. Really sleep. Without nightmares. Without 206 faces staring at him from the darkness. Just sleep. Just rest. Just the peace that comes from finally understanding that one act of mercy can echo across lifetimes. That the bullet never forgets. But sometimes, when you're very lucky, the man behind the trigger finally does.